I call upon Councillor Gareth Moore to move the motion of which he has given notice.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and to just reiterate what you said, I move the motion that's been set out in my name. I'd also like to declare that I'm a member of the Police and Crime Panel and also a member of the Local Partnership Delivery Group for Birmingham North. I'd also like to begin by first of all thanking all those staff, both here at the Council and within housing providers, as well as the police, for all their hard work that they do in Birmingham, tackling the issues of antisocial behaviour. I know that sometimes that can be a thankless task, given the pernicious nature that antisocial behaviour has, and I'm sure many councillors here would have received repeated emails with complaints about antisocial behaviour from their own residents. Now, antisocial behaviour can often be very difficult for people, particularly because sometimes it can be incredibly repetitive, and therefore it drills down on their quality of life and their mental well-being. And sometimes people become very, very exacerbated by being subject to repeated antisocial behaviour. And what's particularly annoying is that a lot of the times that these do not meet the criminal threshold. This is stuff that happens at a low-level nature, doesn't meet the criminal threshold, therefore it's very difficult to tackle some of those issues. But it's really important we do that because it is affecting people's quality of life. I also want to touch on the scale of the problem, because I do have here some statistics from the police. So these are the reported incidents of antisocial behaviour. So obviously there will be those that didn't meet the criminal threshold, but there will also be those that weren't reported. Now, in total, for 2021, there were short of 16,000 incidents of antisocial behaviour reported to the police alone. Now, that's slightly lower than actually the 2020 figures, which are actually at just under 25,000. But then we were under lockdown at that time, so I can imagine a lot more people were feeling subject to antisocial behaviour from their neighbours in a way that they perhaps wouldn't in a normal working environment. I don't have the figures for 2022, unfortunately, but I do have figures for Erdington Ward, of which in Erdington Ward alone, there were 224 reported crimes of antisocial behaviour. Now, obviously, I'm particularly concerned about antisocial behaviour in Erdington, but it's a problem that affects the entire city, and it's something we need to take action on, given those figures that I've just highlighted. Now, obviously, there's a role for the police in that, but there's also a role that Birmingham City Council can do. And so the motion we've put forward here today is about things the council can do to tackle the issues of antisocial behaviour that are sadly plaguing our wards and affecting our residents. Now, the first one is around the community trigger. Now, it's something that actually a lot of people aren't fully aware of, but it was introduced by the government back in 2014. It enables those who are subject to repeated antisocial behaviour to make a complaint if they feel it's not been sufficiently addressed, and the council then has to carry out a multi-agency review to check to see has that been dealt with appropriately, and if not, put an action plan in place. Now, the council does have some figures on its website about the number of community triggers that are taking place. Now, for some reason, they start in 2019, despite the fact the legislation was in 2014. But in 2019, there were 5 inquiries that were made under that, of which 3 met the threshold for review, and 3 cases where recommendations or action plans were made. Now, fortunately, there was an increase on that, Lord Mayor, because in 2020, we had 43 inquiries, of which 33 made the evidential threshold, and then there were 19 where there was an action plan. And then in 2021, we had 42 inquiries, so a slight drop. Number of inquiries meeting the case threshold, again down to 29, but of those 19 had a recommendations or action plan. Now, whilst clearly there is a significant improvement in that, I know full well from my inbox that there are lots of people being subject to repeated antisocial behaviour, and clearly I always encourage them to use the community trigger. But I suspect there are many out there who do not, or are not told about this mechanism they have. And that's particularly important because this council needs to have a joined-up approach to tackling with antisocial behaviour. And I always remember going back to the good old days when we had district committees, which is going back a while now. So for the newer members, once upon a time, the constituencies of the councillors met together and had information shared on what the council services were providing in their area. I remember a question raised by Councillor Des Hughes, particularly around antisocial behaviour in the housing department, because housing were very, very good at closing cases of antisocial behaviour because they passed them to another department to deal with, and they consider that closed. Now, that wasn't closed for that resident because they were still willing subjected to the antisocial behaviour. Quite often it was noise, but at that time, housing took the view that if they reported it to environmental health, case closed, job done, move on to the next one, and clearly that's not acceptable. There's also a situation where people will often have to complain about antisocial behaviour. The police will refer them to the council will refer them to the police will say, oh, you don't live in a council house, therefore we're not interested, despite the fact we have a community safety team, despite the fact as a local authority we can issue things like community protection notices on those engaging in antisocial behaviour. So residents who have been subject to these issues are being passed around, and it's not acceptable, and this council needs to get a grip and sort these issues out so we have a properly joined up approach so anyone suffering antisocial behaviour can have that properly addressed. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is public space protection orders, and I'm grateful that the Moseley one was raised early today, because this was certainly the bane of my life in terms of Erdington. Now, for those who aren't familiar, public space protection order, designated area, it has to be specified on a map, but it gives additional powers to the police to tackle various forms of antisocial behaviour, such as street drinking and begging and such. And it allows them to disperse groups, and that's particularly useful for those areas where this is a problem. And in Erdington, it's to the High Street, which for anyone who's familiar with Erdington, we had a PSPO back in 2016. They have to be in place for 3 years, you have to renew them. So the Erdington one expired in 2019. So despite clearly saying to the council, coming up to 2019, we need to get this renewed because obviously it's going to lapse, it was only last year we actually got that renewed. After constant fighting, after constant perseverance, despite the fact we had the full support of the police, they made, I think it was 2 or 3 bundle evidences in support of that PSPO, and yet this council still dragged its feet and didn't address that. And it's very disappointing because I know Harborne was affected by this, the city centre was affected, and clearly Moseley's been affected by this as well. I don't understand why the council is really struggling to do that, because the police, certainly from Erdington's perspective, are very keen to enforce this because they're getting constant complaints about this antisocial behaviour, but they don't have the powers to do that. And the one that can give them the powers is this council. So this council needs to get off its backside and move forward in addressing this to bring things forward. Now, just very quickly, because I am running out of time, Lord Mayor, touch on concierges, because again, this is very important. In Erdington, we had 13 tower blocks, most of which were served by a concierge service until this council decommissioned them back in 2015. Now, ironically, at the time, they billed that as a saving measure, because if you live in a tower block, you had to pay a service charge. The vast majority of that was covered by housing benefit, but there were some who were self-funders. But the concierge service provided a regular team of people who got on first terms with residents. They know they could go to if they had issues in their property or they needed help and advice or there was a repair issue. And these people had ownership of the area. And sadly, the council removed this, shipped them off into some central hub where they just simply communicate with people through a telephone and don't actually engage anymore. I'm running out of time now, Lord Mayor. So I would just want to emphasise that we need to tackle antisocial behaviour in this city. And I do hope everyone will support our motion here today. Thank you.